The carved bird was the size of her palm, and it had a broken wing. Valis Orath Sevena, second heir to the Veleni hegemony, jewel of the High Tessarine court, keeper of the 14 Accords, picked it up from the edge of the stall without asking and turned it in her fingers. Shipbone carving was an old lower city craft. She had read that in a history text when she was 12. She had never held one before. "That one's not finished," the human said. He didn't look up from the chisel in his hand. "The wing's still rough on the inside curve. If you want a clean one, I've got 3 on the back shelf." Valis set the bird down. She had been in the lower quarter of Thessar for 40 minutes wearing a plain gray marcatrap and a hood that covered her ears, and this was the 4th person she had spoken to today. The previous 3 had been a vegetable seller, a water meter reader, and a child who had asked if she knew where the sweet roll cart had gone. None of them had noticed anything. Neither did this man. He was young, early 20s, she estimated, with dark hair and the kind of hands that came from real work. Nicks across the knuckles, chalk dust in the creases, a small scar below the left thumb from what was probably a blade slipping. He wore a plain work tunic and was carving without looking at her, the chisel moving in short, controlled strokes along the bird's inside wing curve. "Why bother finishing it," she said, "if the wing is broken?" He looked up then, brown eyes steady, curious rather than alarmed. "The wing isn't broken. The feather line just curves in instead of out. Took me 3 tries to realize that's actually what it looks like from underneath." He held it up briefly, turning it so she could see the detail. "Most people don't look from underneath." Valis did not answer immediately. In the Tessarine court, the correct response to an observation was a measured agreement or a gracious deflection. Here on the market stones, with noise and sun and the smell of hot lamp oil from the wick cellar 3 stalls down, neither felt right. "What do you use it for?" she asked instead. "The finished piece." "Some people buy them for luck, some for children. Mostly people just want something made by hand." He set it back on the table between them. "You looking for one as a gift?" "I'm not sure what I'm looking for," she said. He accepted this without pressing it. He went back to the chisel, and Vala stood at his stall and watched him work, which was unusual, because in her experience when she paused at a market stall, the vendor immediately adjusted their behavior, brighter voice, wider offerings, the subtle pressure of wanting to please. This man did none of that. He was simply working. She picked up a finished bird from the back shelf. This one had both wings properly curved, tail feathers spread, head tilted at an angle that suggested it was listening to something. The detail was finer than she had expected. The hollow places at the chest were cleanly carved, light showing through them. "How long does one take?" she asked. "Depends. Simple ones maybe 2 hours. This style," he nodded at the broken-winged bird, "closer to a day. The curvature is hard to get right." "A day for something the size of my hand." "A day for something that looks right," he said. There was no apology in it. Valis set the finished bird down carefully. Across the lane, a fruit seller was arguing good-naturedly with a woman over the price of vine bulbs. 2 children chased each other between the stalls. A Veleni elder in work gray walked slowly past with a bag of flour over one shoulder, not looking at anyone. Ordinary life, moving at ordinary speed. She had read about the lower quarter in briefing documents for years. She had signed allocation orders for its infrastructure, approved its medical ratios, reviewed census data that reduced it to 6 digits and a resource projection. She had never walked it. She had never, in 23 years of living inside the Tessarine court's white walls, stood in a place where no one was watching what she did with her hands. "You're human," she said. "Last I checked." He didn't say it with any particular edge, just acknowledgement. "There aren't many human craftspeople in the lower quarter. There's 4 of us on this lane, 2 carvers, a metalsmith, and a woman who does pressed flower glass panels." He turned the bird again in his hand, checking the angle. "We've been here about 6 years." long enough that most people don't think about it anymore. Does that matter to you? He looked up again, this time with slightly more attention. Does what matter? That people stop thinking about it. He considered this seriously. She appreciated that he didn't rush an answer. I think it matters that they stop thinking it's strange. Doesn't matter what they think about me specifically. He went back to the chisel. Good work doesn't need the person behind it to be interesting. It just needs to be good. The chisel moved. Vala stood still. In the Tessarene court, Lord Cavith Oren had told her 3 weeks ago, at the first of his formal petitions, that he had commissioned a sculpture of her likeness in imported red marble and placed it in his family's receiving hall. He had said it with the confidence of a man presenting proof. She had smiled and thanked him and spent the remainder of that evening trying to identify what exactly had felt so hollow about the gesture. She thought she understood now. Lord Cavith had been showing her a mirror. This man was doing something else entirely. He was just making a thing that looked right and letting that be enough. A hand touched her elbow. She knew the grip, controlled, brief, the Praetorian's professional signal that meant he had found her and was not yet in crisis mode. Your luminance. Denth spoke quietly, close to her ear, his uniform exchanged for a plain civil coat. I respectfully suggest we begin moving. She didn't move. The earring signal, she said. I should have thought of that. You removed the primary one. There is a secondary in the clasp of the wrap. He waited. He had served her family for 9 years and he knew better than to push. Across the lane, she heard a different voice, louder, startled. You're no, yes. And then the unmistakable sound of a man going to his knees on market stones. She recognized it without looking. Lord Cavith Oren, accompanied by 2 of his attendants, had apparently been browsing the lane and had found her. He was kneeling in the dust of the market with his head bent, announcing her full lineage to anyone within 20 meters. Around him, the lane began to slow and stop, people turning, recognition spreading like a wave through the ordinary afternoon. Cale had looked up from the chisel. He was watching Lord Cavith with an expression of mild confusion, the way one watches something puzzling rather than alarming. He had not looked at her yet. Valis turned to face him. The woman he's nailing toward, she said, that's me. The chisel stopped. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time since she'd arrived, and she watched him process it. Not the shock she usually saw in faces. Not the fast recalibration of behavior she had memorized across 100 audiences. Just a quiet, careful reassessment, like someone checking their earlier work to see if the details still held. Oh, he said. She waited. So when you said you didn't know what you were looking for, he said slowly, that was true. Yes. He looked down at the bird in his hands. The broken wing one, not yet finished. He turned it once more, set it on the table between them and looked back up at her. Is the visit over now? He asked, not with any particular weight, simple question. The lane had gone substantially quieter. Denth was a wall of controlled urgency at her left shoulder. Lord Cavith was still kneeling, his attendants shifting uncertainly because no one had given them instruction. 3 Tessarene market guards were moving toward the far end of the lane from the direction of the main avenue, having received a signal she hadn't sent. Valis reached out and picked up the carved bird, not the finished one from the back shelf. The unfinished one, inside curve still rough, wrong way feather line and all. She held it out toward him. Will you finish it? She asked. I would like to come back for it. Cale looked at the bird, then at her. The calculation in his face was not the calculation of a man seizing an opportunity. It was the calculation of someone trying to determine whether a thing was real before committing to it. That would take another half day, he said. I know. And if you're, he tilted his head toward the kneeling lord, the gathering crowd, that then coming back here is going to draw attention to the lane. Yes, she said. but you want the bird finished because the wing detail matters to you. She hadn't put it exactly that way, even to herself. Yes. Not because it's useful to anyone. No. Not to show the court. No. He looked at the bird for a moment, the way someone looks at a thing when they are deciding whether the price is fair, not the coin price, the other kind. But you'd come back anyway. Yes. He took the bird from her, set it back on his workbench with some care. Then I'll finish it. Vallis turned toward Denth. She did not lower her voice. This is Kale. He will be registered as guest of court under my direct sponsorship. Please see that the appropriate documentation is prepared by morning. Denth blinked once. He had been a Praetorian for 9 years, and she had never before given him an instruction he needed a moment to process. Your Luminance. Lord Cavith is present and will. Lord Cavith may stand, she said, and he may note, for whatever record he keeps, that I chose my first guest of court in the market lane. She looked at Kale one last time, because he was looking at the right things. She walked away with the escort at her back. She did not look behind her. She had learned young that looking back in a public space only created scenes. It invited interpretation. It invited the photographers who had followed her since she was 4 years old. It invited the kind of image that got annotated by court commentators who believed that a person's face in an unguarded moment was more telling than anything they chose to say. But she had also learned, only recently, that choosing not to look back was its own kind of answer. Behind her, she heard no proclamation. No silence descended on the lane. Only the ordinary sounds of a market resuming itself, stall by stall, the fruit seller returning to her argument, the children taking up their chase, the clip of a cargo trolley on old stone, and somewhere in the middle of it the quiet, particular sound of a chisel beginning to move again. He was finishing the bird. The court spent the next 3 days in formal objection. Lord Cavith Oren delivered a written petition citing bloodline protocols. 2 senior accord keepers raised procedural questions about human designation under guest of court precedent. The keeper of lineage asked, with careful formality, whether the sponsorship was intended as a preliminary step toward contract. The first chamberlain reminded her, in a document with 2 official seals, that no human had ever held guest of court status in the hegemony's 400-year recorded history, and that precedent was not a trivial matter. Vallis read every word of it. She replied to each communication with 2 sentences. She had noted their concerns, and the sponsorship stood. She signed the documentation on the first morning, and returned to the lower lane on the 3rd afternoon, this time with a single escort in plain coat, arriving at Kale's stall without announcement. The bird was on the front shelf, both wings finished, the inside curve clean, the feather line finally running the way it actually ran beneath a living wing rather than above it, the chest hollow carved to the right depth. Head tilted at the same listening angle as the finished piece she had examined 3 days ago, but with something slightly more patient in it. She could not explain exactly why she read it that way, but she did. Kale was working on something new. He looked up when she arrived, and he didn't adjust anything, voice, posture, the angle of the chisel. Took the full half day, he said. I see that. She picked up the bird and turned it in her fingers, the way she had turned the unfinished one at the start. What do I owe you? He named a price, the same price as the finished bird on the back shelf 3 days ago, not less out of some misplaced deference, not more from opportunity. Exactly the market rate, as though the last 3 days had not happened, and she were simply a customer who had placed an order. She paid it. She stood for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Kale had already returned to the new piece, something larger, a block of pale ship bone roughed into a shape she couldn't yet identify. He worked with the same focused quiet as before. The documentation went through, she said, not because he needed to know, because she was still learning how conversations worked in this lane, where ordinary information was not a transaction. Cale nodded without looking up. Someone from the court came by yesterday, left a paper. He turned the block in his hand. I put it in the back. You didn't read it. I read it. Said I had access to the upper market lanes. He set the chisel against the bone. I don't want them. Vallis looked at the bird in her hand, then at the lane, the fruit seller's awning, the trolley making its slow way back from the water gate. I might come back, she said, not officially. He glanced up briefly. I figured, that's why I started something bigger. She understood what he meant. She was fairly certain he understood what she meant. She did not look back when she left, but she carried the bird in her hand all the way to the court gate, where the white walls closed around her, and the familiar weight of who she was settled back onto her shoulders. The carved bird sat on the windowsill of her private room that evening in the last light, both wings properly curved, head tilted at the listening angle. The court had begun to treat Cale's sponsorship as settled. Lord Cavith's petition had gone quiet. The sealed documents had stopped. Vallis did not announce her visits. She came in plain gray, stayed an hour, sometimes less, a few words, long silences, the kind of exchange where neither party felt the need to fill every gap. She had not yet said anything that could not also be true between a craftsman and a customer. She suspected that would not remain the case. It was, she decided, a reasonable place to start.